The three principles under which the ego is unconsciously ruled. Evolution gave rise to atoms and molecules. The proto-ego has existed ever since before the first forms of biological life appeared, and it has been perfecting the first two egoic principles. So, with the appearance of the animal kingdom, it improved the third principle. Spiritual Intelligence IES proposes these principles. Survival, the first principle of the ego, applicable to all beings. Since the origin of quantum life, survival has been present in particles that remain under certain ranges of conditions until they change their state to evolve. By making matter subsist unhomogeneously in formations of protogalactic nebula and within them protostellar clouds. This is how the first galaxies were formed, and 4 generations of stars, planets, moons, asteroids, and comets. By keeping this egoic principle in this universe of the mineral kingdom, it has been surviving under these states: solid, liquid, gaseous, and plasmatic, subject to gravity, temperature, pressure, and electromagnetism, including dark matter that is not affected by electromagnetism. The survival of the quantum mind has made possible the cosmic evolution of molecular bodies through the action of the following 4 mental principles explained by Spiritual Intelligence IES. Symbiosis, synergy, fractality, and holo movement regarding the metaphysical quantum mind. It is important to research online the experiments that demonstrate the existence of the quantum mind. Experiments made by David Joseph Bohm for electrons, Alan Aspect for speeds faster than the speed of light, Bernard Grad and Masaru Emoto for the mind of the water, as well as the Einstein-Rosen-Podolsky paradox, the Einstein-Lorentz transformation, the John S. Bell theorem, and William Tiller's metaphysical space-time. As supernovas progressively manage to produce molecules of heavier atoms, the proto-ego developed the ability to change states between solid, liquid, gaseous, and even colloidal until its material collapsed in black holes. Fulfilling the evolutionary process, planetary cycles were formed for elements such as water, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, etc. Electrostatic charges also appeared for the formation of various atmospheric phenomena, and amino acids were produced on planets like ours. Evolutionary survival energized the formation of long chains of amino acids. Their egos managed to connect in order to achieve molecular self-replication of the APN, precursor of RNA and DNA. In the end, under the survival and development of its proto-quantum free will, the nature of the organic mineral kingdom developed in order to achieve biological life that best displays this principle of survival in every living being in its struggle to survive. Thus, according to current anthropology, human life evolved from primates in Africa. It has kept this egoic principle throughout the centuries in an increasingly less wild, less predatory way, and now increasingly respectful of the human rights, although endemic spiritual poverty remains the primary root of all social ills today. Preservation of the species, the second principle of the ego. Preservation began manifesting itself as the ability of the molecular proto-ego began fraternally to unite quarks within protons and neutrons, which in turn constitutes the atomic nuclei. The fraternal union continued through molecules of chemical covalence. Its best expression was extraordinarily developed in the chemical properties of carbon, the only element that links itself into polypeptide chains. This element managed to preserve organic chemistry, linking its molecules starting from hydrocarbons until they evolved to form APN, RNA, and DNA. Preservation began an increasingly complex refinement under the development of cellular free will. Thus, cells learned to coexist and protect each other in protozoan colonies of viruses and bacteria, and so on, until vegetables flourished with the propensity to reproduce in crops. Animals began to live in flocks, herds, groups of families. Even within each multicellular individual, the ego of each cellular component manifests itself to be preserved within each tissue, and thus it forms organs that are preserved in systems. Today, mankind has socially extended this principle, not only for the direct preservation of the species, protecting children and the elderly as a priority. It does so with an increasingly long-term criteria. The direct preservation of the source of natural resources, endangered species, flora and fauna is already common, and even new ethical standards for the protection of domestic animals, hunting of wild animals in captivity, and the sacrifice of laboratory animals. Last but not least, the protection of the entire human system from irremissible threats of pandemics. Its karmic intentionality is just being discovered by developing virtues of solidarity, cooperation, empathy, etc. Many modalities of coexistence, education, work, transportation, business, commerce, entertainment, etc. Pleasant ludicrousness. the third principle of the ego, today prioritized by human beings. Plants already benefited from ludicness by spreading their leaves and opening their petals to the warmth of the sunlight in order to retain humidity of the ground and rain to feed the roots, and also to condense the dew on their leaves and petals. All biological species, including plants, cnidarians, fungi, bacteria, viruses, they experience some form of recreation in their ego, according to their corresponding evolutionary degree. In the evolution of animals, especially mammals, it can be observed the progress of enjoying recreational pleasure of playing, more as offspring than as adults. An adult male risks its life in order to obtain the recreational right of sexual mating as a reward. Unlike their animal ancestors who had a rational ego and acted by instinct without questioning or remorse, in the rational ego of humans, the progress and sophistication of their civilization is increasingly followed, with the development of new and better ways to enjoy pleasant ludicrousness in comfort zones. Barbaric ludicrousness in the sanguinary Roman circus was replaced by gambling and betting on dog fights, cockfights, bullfights, boxing, and various fights. It goes on now with soccer, basketball, tennis, car racing, cycling, other sports, competitive reality shows, novels, movies, television series, and musical shows. Mass media prioritizes shows with content of extreme emotion and or sex. Today, humanity has acquired a vicious tendency in its informal life, leisure and freedom, in order to reverse the hierarchical order that nature has imposed on these three principles, which is the same order in which they have been presented here. Thus, today, although it seems absurd, ludicrousness is preferred over the survival and preservation of the species. It is very alarming the irrepressible tendency of our society to develop a growing number of young people and adults who irresponsibly show extreme contempt for life, theirs and that of others. Friends addicted to dangerous games. They risk their lives in order to obtain extreme pleasures. Teenage parties with alcohol consumption and sexual orgies. Games and sex in school-age students. Fights, pregnancies, abortions, and teenage babies that are usually raised by grandmothers. The dangerous practice of cliff jumping and suicidal drag races. Improvised gravity cyclists who descend dizzyingly down the roads. Weapons, mostly in public schools. Bullying to obtain money for drugs or sex. Street gangs, fights for territorial supremacy. Addictions to tobacco, marijuana, alcohol, sexual promiscuity, and drug abuse lead to relationships with juvenile delinquency, gangs, and criminal mafias. Activities such as the taste for fusion foods, energy drinks, travel, tourism, sports, entertainment, adventures continue to have strength and even become obsessive, including piercings, tattoos, use of anabolic steroids in weightlifting, beautification surgeries, commercial sex, alcohol and drugs, etc. Youth game rooms for teens and casinos and betting rooms for adults are also proliferating. Electronic equipment that today also floods homes. Video game applications and movie via Netflix. Compulsive practices of social networks, the latter tends to replace family time, promoting vicious ludicrousness with harmful content, of excess competition, motivating social isolation, family indifference, sexual precocity, or violence. All these reflect the constant deterioration under the spiritual poverty of egos without SIMBREs. On the other hand, a hint of SIMBRE and or constructive ego exhibited by leaders in order to improve the quality of life has managed to reduce and humanize the income and food conditions for elderly people without pensions, for the mother, head of household, and the children, working hours, maternity, paternity leaves, recreational work breaks in factories and offices, and vacation centers for the worker's entire family. Conditions of social housing, public transportation, communications, health and maternity have improved. School recreational teaching, children playgrounds in daycare centers, also pet care centers, children playgrounds in shopping centers have increased in large number. The examples expressed above make it evident that under this principle, the search, whether truthful or fallacious, to optimize well-being and pleasure by avoiding or reducing as much as possible all that is arduous, laborious, boring, painful, and all that causes suffering, or more sophisticatedly, all that causes the loss of peace and harmony. All of the above has made this principle a reality as part of our lifestyle, which seeks for the ego to comply by making the first two principles effective with the maximum of pleasurable enjoyment and the minimum of pain and suffering. Finally, the ego of all beings has different ways and degrees of enforcing the three principles of the ego that we have just pointed out, all of which can and must be improved under our proposal to introduce into academic education the comprehensive ethical training of psychospirituality of our Spiritual Intelligence IES proposal, under the transcendence of the ego through the mind that must be awakened and developed from early childhood to postgraduate, simultaneously leaving materialist reductionism when science and academia change their focus towards holism that includes spirituality without religious context.